Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Bob, and he'll introduce himself in a moment, but I just wanted to thank you all as the disembodied voice behind the camera. Thank you for being plugged into history. We really appreciate you joining us here on this digital platform. We're sorry that you can't be here with us in person, but until such time as Middleton Place and the Edmonston Alston House reopen, we are so happy to bring you this digital content and keep connecting you to the past. Keeping people connected to the past is our mission here at Middleton Place, and we're thrilled to bring it to you digitally. Today is On the Farm Wednesday, and with that, I'm going to let Bob take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. As you've heard, my name is Bob. I work with all the historic agriculture and livestock here, and I know we've been talking about the house as well today, so I can't talk about the kitchen, though, without talking about where things come from. And that's one of the things we're kind of excited that we do here at Middleton Place, that folks can come out and see some of the crops and some of the livestock and some of these heirloom and what they call heritage varieties. And you really get a sense of some of these things, and of course how they're being grown, when they're being grown, and of course who's doing the work. And of course we know quite a large number of enslaved people here as well doing all of that, but we'll get into that a little more. I like to start with the big picture in a way. One of the ways I kind of explain this place to people is give you a sense of its climate and its topography. First of all, realize about 100 million years ago, we give you a lot of history here at this place. About 100 million years ago, Columbia, state capital today, that was the beach. So this is all prehistoric ocean bottom. It's a very sandy soil, very light soil. You don't find a lot of stone. No glaciers came through here. And of course, it's a little warmer here. I know I have some friends up north, and it's been in the 40s and 50s. I think it's going over 80 today. They're saying close to 90 tomorrow. So we grow a few different things, too. So right now, things being a little slow, we're actually doing what's called double digging here in our demonstration garden. And what they're doing is, we do plant a successional crop of things like legumes to help fix nitrogen in the soil, sort of a rotation, if you will. But a double dig is you dig down deep. You're really turning that soil over, really aerating it and loosening it up. If you do this in your own gardens and home, it's a great thing to do. You get a lot of time in your hands. I'm hoping you're staying home, so give you a little workout too. And that'll get all this soil going. And we're going to talk a little more about some of the particular crops we plant. I'll be over visiting Jeff here in a minute. But one of the things I like to point out, this is field peas. These are field peas, sometimes called cow peas or pigeon peas, and a big part of the low country food cupboard, if you will, but also great for the soil. It is a legume, fixes nitrogen in the soil. So let me back up a little bit, kind of the bigger picture, and then we'll get into more specifics. First of all, realize that these kinds of crops here, I know everybody thinks of the South, you think of things like rice, hopefully, or cotton, but obviously people had to eat. Charleston is quite a big market, or was quite a big market back in the day. And we always like to point out how here in 1860, right before the American Civil War, only about 60 acres of rice under cultivation. They had 400 milk cows, and we'll talk about cow milk a little later. But they're also growing thousands of bushels of things like sweet potatoes and corn, not for the 150 enslaved people here doing the work. They're shipping that food down to the city. The market crop going down here to Charleston. If anybody's visited Charleston, the old market downtown, that's where they were selling a lot of this back in the day. That was the Piggly Wiggly of its day, and for those of you from off, that's the supermarket. So they're selling food down there. But we do also know, these enslaved people here very often, because they're working on this task system where they have a certain amount of work to do in a day, and it best be done, they also are keeping some of their own crops. And so really you get a mix here. I explained to folks how Charleston, to me, you've got folks, of course, Europeans are coming here. They're Native Americans already here. And of course, they're bringing these enslaved West Africans, taking them from West Africa, coming through the Caribbean and coming here. And all those different things come together, and they mix and mingle, and they make this low country what it is, including the foods and the plantings that we have here. Now, I mentioned field peas, an African crop. Another one, 1785, there was an Italian traveler by the name of Luigi Castiglione. I can't make up these names, I'm telling you. He actually comes here, he's in this area, visits 1785, and he noted how the enslaved people here are growing things like their own okra, which he is fascinated by. And for those who've not seen an okra plant, look it up, check it out, plant some of your own. Loves it hot, this drier soil, the sandier soil, has the same flower as a hibiscus or a cotton plant. They're all in the mallow or malvicae family. And that flower, once it passes off after about a day or two, gives you that nice green pod, which is then chopped up and makes a nice gumbo or something good like that. That's being grown here. He's very fascinated by that. Also, he mentions, and we'll talk some more about these a little later, ground nuts, and we're talking about our peanuts. We still grow some African runner peanuts, which go back to the 1690s here. He also mentioned sweet potatoes. Irish, or what we call the white potatoes, don't do too well here. It's really hot. But the sweet potatoes, they love it here. So I mentioned 1860, thousands of bushels of sweet potatoes being shipped from Middleton Place down to the city. And he also mentions tomatoes. Believe it or not, there are tomatoes being grown in Charleston prior to 1720. Some argue as early as the 1680s or 90s. And I know some folks, they talk about, they think, oh, they thought tomatoes were poisonous and all kinds of things. Well, a good book by a guy named Andy Smith called The Tomato. Check it out. Tomatoes, of course, coming from South America, going to the Old World with the Spanish and others, and being brought back to the New World, especially by the English here. And like I say, we know a lot of these enslaved folks coming from places like the Caribbean, so they're growing them right here. So they go way back here in Charleston.
That's an interesting point, Bob. I come from up north, same area around where you do, and that's definitely a story I remember being told coming up, is that tomatoes only come
we'll
here.
Tomatoes here a little bit, we can take little side roads all the time. Tomatoes, they talk about them being deadly poisonous, once thought to be. And they are in the nightshade family. The greens are toxic, but of course the fruit's pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
1830s, 40s, and I'm kind of condensing a lot here. They have what they call these great tomato pill wars, all these kinds of, what do they call, like these magic elixir, snake oil salesmen. They talk about dehydrating these tomatoes and making these little pills, and they, cure everything from baldness to impotence. And of course, they pitch it all by saying, once thought deadly dangerous. Well, again, as I tell people, don't think of Charleston so much like a Southern American city. It's really more like a Northern Caribbean city. And so they knew about tomatoes, and they were growing them here and eating and using them. And so really, that's kind of a Northern thing, and it's kind of a bit of a fallacy. But makes it good for us because we can grow all kinds of great tomatoes. The other thing I will say about all these crops, and I'm going to talk about heirloom crops, and I'll be happy to give you specific recommendations and where you can get the seed and all that, all by mail order, practice your social distancing, is that old-fashioned crops mean old-fashioned work. But you also get great flavors too. I always use the example of the tomato. If you're buying a tomato in your supermarket in February and it was grown in Canada, it probably wasn't grown for flavor. It was probably grown for how long it can sit on a truck. Some of these heirloom varieties, wonderful flavor, but they only last about a day or so. Use them up. So find some excuse to have some tomato sandwiches or some other fine treats. So we talked about double digging. These gardens, we know, we don't know if there was one specifically tied in here to Middleton Place in the house. The assumption is it would have been around here somewhere, probably. But we do know a lot of these enslaved people, of course, kept their own gardens. That's part of the deal. Where not only did they have maybe a half an acre of rice to work in a day, but they were also expected to raise some of their own foods. And we know they were doing that. And in a way, it sort of allows these folks to keep some of their own culture and their own foods, which do eventually work its way onto the table in the big house. Well, we've talked a bit about this. I think we might head over and see what Jeff's up to. I know we put him to work. I always like these things when I do this because we usually put him to work and I do the talking. It's kind of fun. We get a lot of pictures of him down in the rice field hard at it.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody who's just joining us. Thanks for being here. We're with Bob and Jeff for On the Farm today. We're talking about kitchen gardens and how the food that makes its way onto that beautiful table that you saw in the house yesterday starts out. So thanks for joining us, and especially a happy anniversary today to William and Bonnie. We hope that you do get to come back and see us again soon. We're sorry you can't be here with us today on your wedding anniversary.
This is Captain, by the way, keeping an eye on things.
Bonus horse, everybody. Hi, Kathy. Hi, buddy.
Well, let's head over and see what Jeff's up to. Chickens out and about.
If you watch Lamb Cam, you know that often you get bonus chickens. So there you go, bonus chicken.
Bonus footage, cameo appearance.
We even got a bonus sheep for you over there. Man, all the bonuses today. Thanks for joining us, folks. I see you all from all over the country. Thanks for being here with us.
Okay, well, as I said earlier, I'm Bob, working with all the agriculture. This is Jeff Neal, our, what are you now, director of something or other? I know you're the guy.
Interpretation. Whatever they need me to do.
Whatever comes down the pike.
Yeah.
So we've got our what we call our Anna Perry garden. Miss Anna Perry used to live here, of course, and a long time employee, but also more than that here at Middleton Place. So we name it after her, and we still keep her memory. But we do plant some things in here, talk about some of the foods and different crops they would have had. Oh yeah, here we go. I mentioned earlier these African runner peanuts. This is an heirloom variety, a very old variety. They're down there pretty deep. Yeah, look at that. So what you're seeing here, if anybody wants to know how peanuts grow, I will admit I have a lot of friends. They come down and they're like, they don't know if they pluck them off a tree like an apple or quite what, but that is the peanut being grown underground. And
that's what it looks like coming out of the shell.
And of course you can roast these, you can boil them. That's one of my favorites. And these are from last year's crop actually. I just leave a lot of them and they'll pop right back up. Now one thing to note, they're very small, and that's pretty common with these African runners. They're a very old variety. Honestly, not very popular. I know when I go get boiled peanuts, I want them nice and big, you know. 1870s, they bring in these what they call Spanish peanuts, the big red-skinned ones that we see today that everybody loves. And they look a whole lot nicer than these little tiny ones. These are actually very high in oils, and today they've made a big comeback for the restaurant trade because they do have that great flavor to them, and that's being used now in a lot of these local foods here. Hopefully you'll come back and check out some of our Charleston restaurants. So that's an African runner peanut, which today, of course, we know the science of it, how it fixes nitrogen in the soil and helps keep that soil in good shape. They didn't know this. They didn't know the science of it, but they knew what worked, and that's what they did. We've got a few other things planted, and I got to give a big shout out to Jamie Ugurtis. She works our organic farm here. She's been doing all this. She does fantastic work. We've got a couple winter crops still kind of going here. Like I say, it's close to the 80s today, but we've got some what we used to call colewort, C-O-L-E-W-O-R-T. You get extra points if you know what a colewort is, but it's collard greens. Collard greens are just open-headed cabbages, essentially, in the brassica family. They like it down into they can take it down into the 20s without much trouble, so they're a great winter crop here. Now, quick side note, we were talking about things like tomatoes earlier, about collard greens today. One of my pet peeves today, when you go to the market, you have to buy what's called a bunch collard. Collard greens, generally, they'll just keep growing and keep growing, and so what they used to do, and I still do, is as the leaves get big, you take the leaves off, leaving the plant to grow, and you can harvest up. That's why I'll grow 10, 15, 20 of them at a time, and you take the leaves, and those, of course, you then make into your good collard greens. I prefer a little black pepper bacon with mine, but we're all different.
I would say one more thing, too, that my preference for them, they have to be picked after the frost.
Yep. Yeah.
Because that frost, what it does, it causes the sugar to go into the leaves, and it gives it a little better taste.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
It after the frost.
That's why I think a lot of times when you see them, in the warmer weather, folks add a little vinegar, I think, to cut the bite of them a little bit. I like them, like you say, after the cool weather. But eventually, by the spring, these things begin to look like big, giant green poodle tails. Oh, we got a question maybe from folks?
Just about the runner peanuts real quick. Is that a seed that you can buy online?
Yes, as a matter of fact. That was actually a gentleman, Mr. Brian, Dr. I should say, Brian Ward, down here at the Clemson Coastal Center here down on Savannah Highway. He actually grew out the seed a few years ago, and today it's actually become commercially available. Highly recommend. A couple different sources. One of my favorites personally is Southern Exposure Seed Exchange out of Virginia. They do work often with Monticello and other sites. Also Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. But you can get this. It's called an African Runner. Again, the peanuts are small. The way the peanut works is it is a runner. The plant will grow. It'll send out tendrils. They'll drop roots into the soil, and on those roots, more peanuts are grown. But it's not a big peanut, but delicious. Highly recommend it. Southern Exposure or Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. So the collard greens, the ones we get today in the market, like I say, they're called these bunch collards because today, of course, industrial farming, you want to be able to cut them all once, sell this whole plant. I like the old-fashioned ones, just to tell you. The food, the taste, I think, is a lot better. And of course, cabbages as well, another big winter crop here. Also, you can grow things like garlic, onion, all winter. But this is getting into that warmer time of year, so we are planting okra. That's what these have been direct seeded with okra seeds, and I was mentioning the okra earlier. Another one I like to grow around here, and it's actually a very historic crop, hot peppers. There's actually one variety called the fish pepper from up around what they call the Delmarva, the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia area, which we know freedmen, former slaves after the American Civil War, are growing, and that's where its heritage goes back to. But again, I mentioned how a lot of these folks coming, taken from West Africa, coming through the Caribbean and bringing some of that Caribbean spice with them as well. So that's not uncommon at all in a lot of these gardens. So Jeff's doing some fun stuff. Let's see what he's up to. Now, if you didn't know, Jeff had been our potter for a long time. Still has a little bit of that clay on his hands, I think. Still got a little bit of it in his blood. So he's got a fun little device here, and it is a period thing. It's something they did use historically, called a
thumb pot, or sometimes it's called a water bell as well. And I'll pick it up here, and as you can see, it's kind of shaped like a bell shape. All right, and I'm going to use my thumb to cover the top. If you can look at the bottom there, I don't know if you can see it that well. There's holes at all these holes at the bottom, but you notice I've already filled this with water. No water is coming out because I've cut off the air because there's a hole on the top. But all I do is pick it up, remove my thumb. We get a little shower.
There you go.
Stop. Go to my next plant. And this is how we can water these without wasting a whole lot of water. Just going back and forth with the plant. We'll do the cabbage here. Bob, did you notice we have a special bloom over here in the cabbage?
I know, I was going to ask you. Somebody spied flat Arthur, so how do we grow a flat Arthur?
It's a very special seed we cultivate only here at Middleton.
Yeah, that's a foundation secret. Foundation secret. But yeah, it's a great time of year to get things planted. Folks here anywhere in the southeast, get out there, start planting. I know folks in the northeast, there's still some chilly nights, but you can still get things like onions out there. The one thing they would do here, of course, is what they call successional planting. My favorite story about early planting, of course, Thomas Jefferson and the peas, those nice sweet English peas, they call them, those green peas. And they used to compete amongst the folks up there in Virginia, the folks like Jefferson and his neighbors, who had the first crop of peas. So they would do all kinds of things. They had these little glass bells they would use to warm the plants and different things. And one year, Thomas Jefferson won. Well, the deal was, if you won, if you were the first ones to have a crop of peas, you had to host a dinner, host your neighbors, and you're going to be eating, of course, your peas. Thomas Jefferson won. When he was told of that, he didn't want to tell anyone else, so he let someone else win because he didn't want to host a dinner. So I don't know what that tells you about him, but that's one of my good Jefferson stories.
So we have a question.
Okay.
Did they grow corn?
Yes, corn, and it's interesting. A lot of folks think of corn, those nice long straight rows. They actually grew them in mounds. And this is where you do get some, of course, I mentioned Native Americans being here earlier, the famous three sisters, the corn, beans, and squashes, gourds, those kinds of things. We do grow gourds. We know some of the enslaved people would have grown gourds and even made things like banjos out of them. But to get back to the corn, yes, very big thing here. Not like our modern sweet corns. Those kinds of eating it off the cob kind of varieties aren't until the late 19th, almost early 20th century. Most corn, we're talking about something you might call today a flint corn, really made for grinding, and the plants are nowhere near as large as some of the plants we have today, not as productive, but good hardy stuff. One of the varieties that's being grown, it's actually very popular now. It's a Johnny Red, it's called. My wife makes a cornbread out of that, has a little bit of natural sweetness to it, it's delicious. But they would have planted in mounds, and actually as they grew, where the ears did not come out, they would actually cut off those leaves and keep them and dry them and use them to feed livestock in the winter, and of course eventually harvest that corn, dry it, and that's something they would have issued back to the enslaved people, this dried corn as part of their daily rations and other things.
Even part of the enslaved diet, probably the two main staples here is corn, and then I'd throw rice in right
without a doubt, without a doubt. Yeah. So we've got some of our winter crop coming in. We'll have some of our spring crop coming in. As you probably have guessed, it's been a little slow here. We've been not as busy, so to say. But these, a huge part of the diet here. Obviously today we've got the luxury of getting anything, anytime we want. This would have definitely been seasonally, and believe it or not, for many folks, not so much this time of year, once you get into about February, March, that late winter, early spring is actually kind of a thin time because you're down to root crops, things like your carrots and turnips and other root crops that you'd be either storing or here, luckily, we're able to grow. This year, I know we didn't have any really cold nights, so we were able to grow all these root crops all through the year. But a lot of your fresh stuff hasn't really come up yet. I mentioned Jefferson and his contest for the peas. So I believe it or not, some of these spring days could actually be some of the thinnest when it comes to some of this food crop. But luckily we have a very early spring here. I don't even think, like I say, we had much of a winter. So there's usually, it's very productive here, but it's a very light sandy soil. So you find crops that are really well suited to that. I know I get questioned a lot about tobacco. Not really a big crop here. For a lot of different reasons, partly the landscape, partly, these swamps are so perfect really for growing rice. That becomes the overwhelming crop. But also, the humidity here and the soil is a lot lighter. I mentioned that 100 million years ago, Columbia being the beach. Above it are all these great prehistoric river bottom lands, not so much below it. When you drive down 95, all that sand and pines, that's the remnants of that prehistoric ocean. So think about the topography and understand the climate, and you realize why certain things were such big crops here.
Bob, when you say the tobacco that was grown here, the very little,
Yeah.
probably more medicinal.
Oh yeah, well actually we do know there's an example of an enslaved woman sold down here to South Carolina from Virginia, and she did grow tobacco to barter and trade with. And that's another thing to understand. We've mentioned earlier how down the road here about 5-6 miles was Ashley Ferry Town. We do know the enslaved people here would be working 5.5 days a week, give or take. Usually Sundays they were allowed to go to places like the Ferry Market and barter and trade some of the things they're growing. Generally, they're not allowed to grow things that are the same crops they're already growing, like rice. Plantation owners always question the problem of theft. But very often, like I mentioned, this enslaved woman from Virginia, she was a specialist, frankly, in growing tobacco, and used that knowledge, I'm sure, to grow tobacco that she could then barter and trade for all kinds of things. We know they did the same thing with livestock as well, hogs and other things. So Jeff's doing a little ground prep here. We're going to plant some rice over here, and we'll do that another time. But notice, of course, the wooden split-handled rake, they call it. Also, these big heavy hoes. It's interesting, today, if you go to get a good cultivating hoe like this, I'll be honest, if you go to any hardware store, big box store, it's all the same hoe blade, honestly. The blade's all the same. Back then, we see from catalogs and even things earlier in the late 18th and early 19th century, there's thousands of different kinds. They had rice hoes, tobacco hoes. And the other thing I've noticed too, many of the images we've seen of enslaved people working these fields, their handles would have been much longer and heavier than this. And it makes good sense. If you have to do an acre at a time, with that long, heavy hoe, you can work a lot quicker, cover a lot more, and you row a lot quicker. Now, the other thing we were just talking about, and I noticed the other tool back here, is what they call a dibble. Believe it or not, that's not just a funny name for somebody, Mr. Dibble. But so it's interesting. We've really got two worlds here: the world of the enslaved people, and of course, this sort of European world, the sort of larger, if you will, more, for lack of a better word, the white world. So we know folks in West Africa, and I don't doubt some of these enslaved people in their own gardens here. We sometimes talk about the heel and toe method for planting rice. Dig a hole with your toe, put some rice seed in, cover with your heel. I don't doubt enslaved people here in their own gardens are doing that. I don't doubt people in West Africa learned to do that. Europeans did a little bit different. They used the dibble. This one's actually made from an old handle of a shovel, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, if you have an acre or so to do, and you're bent over trying to do it with your hand, your back gets hurting pretty fast. So this would be something, it might even be longer, and just makes your hole, makes your drill, if you will, for your planting. And then we also have fancy ones now, a depth gauge, essentially. Now I will tell you, if you're going to be planting some of this stuff at home, rule of thumb is you plant your seed about twice as deep as the seed is thick. So what that means is tobacco, which usually isn't planted by seed because the seeds are so fine they look almost like dust, would just be right on the surface. Same thing with rice. It's not a big seed, but beans and peas, indigo is like little tiny pencil points. You just kind of dust that stuff and run a rake over it. But bigger and heavier seeds, your peas and beans, which are pretty large, those can go fairly deep. Your peanuts as well, they can go fairly deep, and that'll give you a good planting. But yeah, about twice as deep as the seed is thick. That's a rule of thumb for that. The other thing, soil temperature. We're kind of in a shady spot, so I like to just literally stick my hand in the ground, just get a feel for it. And if it feels cold to your touch, just think about how it would be for a seed or a plant root. Generally here, like I say, we're getting days in the 80s now, so I'm not worried about soil temperature. But you folks up north, just kind of, stick your finger in there, see what it's like.
So how do these things make their way onto the table?
Oh, well, one of my favorite things. Sure, as you can tell, I like a good table.
That's the best part.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I looked into earlier and done some research about things like hunting, for instance. We know usually when slave owners went to hunt, they brought enslaved people with them as gun guides and bearers and cooks as well. And so you begin to see things like Hoppin' John. We showed you those field peas earlier. Usually enslaved people, when they were issued things like meat, say 5 pounds of pork, it's not a piece of fine Virginia ham. It's usually a jowl meat or a streak of lean belly meat or a trotter, salted and smoked.
Cheap guts.
Exactly. And so the meat now, that's not the main course, that becomes the flavoring. You throw that in a pot with your field peas, cook it up slow, let those peas kind of nice and soften up and soak up a lot of that grease and smoke, and then throw in some rice at the end to soak up all that good flavor, and you've got Hoppin' John.
And does that make its way onto the table in the big house
so
too?
You begin to see where they begin to taste this stuff and try these different things, and suddenly you begin to hear them say, well, now I'd like you to do that for this dinner or that dinner. The hunt clubs very often had dinners. And of course there's the famous example of, was it Thomas Jefferson's niece who writes the cookbook?
Oh, for okra stew.
Yeah.
She writes, and she tells you how to prepare it, except she says if you want to cook this the right way, you want to cook it the best way, do not cook it in an iron cast pot. You need to cook it in a clay pot, like slaves are cooking. That's the best thing. For those who tuned in yesterday, we talked about the enslaved house servants up in the house. And one thing that these people do in that house is they bring elements of, shall we say, African American culture or African culture into the big house, and in turn they take elements of the big house culture, the white culture, bring it into the enslaved community. So you have this mixture of foodways and kind of this whole creolization of things just kind of blending together.
It really makes the Low Country what it is. And even still today, I talk about how how English, as you see up in the house, the fine silver, the furnishings, how English the Middletons and folks like them were trying to be, but that's not English food you're eating. Thankfully so. No knock on the English. But so again, you get this mix of cultures and peoples here that really make it a very unique kind of place.
Our special plan here. Fix him up there.
Well, do y'all have anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, let's see. We've talked about some of the different crops. If folks do have more questions about this, again, some of the resources that are out there, you can go on Google Books. One of my favorite books is it's called The Southern Market Gardener, published here in Charleston in 1842, and it's fascinating. Again, I mentioned how they're growing tomatoes here back in the 18th century. There are things that we think are so modern today, they were doing over 200 years ago. And so you can take a look at some of these older books and things. And again, if you want some of these heirloom seeds, some of these older varieties, great catalogs online for Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, Baker Creek heirloom seeds. They have some great things out there. The African Runner peanuts, I highly recommend them. They're a little different. And sometimes, I'll be honest, like I said before, old-time crops mean old-time work. But the flavors really are what they were here, and it's something luckily we still have here hundreds of years later. And hopefully when we are back open, you come to our restaurant and taste some of them, and come visit Charleston and some of these other fine restaurants that are here as well.
Absolutely. We'll tap you, Bob, for some links for those seed catalogs, and I know Jeff has been putting together a list of additional resources for us.
I would say maybe the best modern one, shall we say, is Vegetable Gardening the Colonial Williamsburg Way.
All right.
Which gives you a lot of what Bob is talking about and the ways, and also it has wonderful resources in it to be able to get heirloom seeds and things of that nature.
So everyone, will get links up online if you go to our Plugged Into History digital portal on the Middleton Place website, and that's basically going to be a growing list of additional resources that we can provide for you. So keep checking back there frequently. So I think if y'all don't have anything else.
I guess the next time in here we'll be doing
Rice.
Doing rice next
Gotta get some
time.
rice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Show
getting
up
pretty
in-
close.
inside
I like
the
to get it
garden
nice
here.
and warm for the rice.
There we go.
All right, well, we'll make sure to tune in for that. Tomorrow, we'll have Hands-On History at 11 a.m., and that's going to be inside the house again with Rakina and Carol, and they're going to talk about polishing silver and how to handle maybe your own stuff at home, or we can also give you a little bit of information about how the museum takes care of our museum objects. So make sure you come back at 11 a.m. tomorrow, and as you can see, these guys are hard at work even though we aren't open. Middleton Place is well, you are. Middleton Place is a nonprofit educational trust, and so we thank you all so much for your continued support, because without it, then we can't take care of these wonderful lands, these wonderful crops, these wonderful animals. And so we really appreciate you joining us today and every day. If you are able, we would encourage you to go to middletonplace.org/donate, and you can help us out. Again, we're a private nonprofit educational trust, which means we don't get any government funding. We're all here because of the generosity of you folks and everyone who comes to visit us when you can. So thank you very much. We appreciate you. We hope you are all staying safe and well. Make sure you're following your CDC guidelines.
Stay healthy.
And yeah, stay home, stay safe, and we'll bring you updates on these things that are growing here. So Flat Arthur is growing, and we'll bring you more next time. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Take
Bye,
care.
guys.
Stay
Bye.
safe. Stay healthy.